Hello, this lecture is on the rise of Greek philosophy, and I have to tell you this is one of my favorite lectures to give, in particular because I get to talk about Socrates. Now, Socrates is a fascinating person. He was a stonecutter by trade, so he was a manual laborer, and he's very important in the development of Western civilization. And I think it's interesting that two of the main elements of the development of Western civilization, in a sense, two of the main founders, one is Socrates, who was a stonecutter. The other is Jesus, who was a carpenter. So you have two very important figures in world history, particularly in the development of the West, who worked with their hands. And I think that gave them a very practical outlook on things. In addition, Socrates was a veteran. He had done his military service. In fact, he had fought in, I believe it was the second Persian invasion. So he had fought the Persians and was actually mentioned in a dispatch because he helped save someone's life. One of his comrades was in danger, and Socrates risked his life to help him. Now, I want to stress Socrates wasn't like a general or anything like that. He was one of the poorer soldiers, but he did have enough to be a hoplite. So he wasn't a general or anything like that. He was just kind of a grunt. I think he was kind of like the equivalent of a corporal, so low-ranking soldier. But he did his duty well. He also participated actively, as a citizen should, in according to Athenian values, in the democracy. He had won the lottery and had served in various political positions. And one example of, I think, something that tells you about his integrity, there was a naval battle, and in the battle, some Greek ships sunk, and the fellow Greeks, instead of waiting to help the Greek sailors, fled. So those Greek sailors who had been on the ships that sunk drowned. And a lot of the Athenians said, we should execute these guys. They were cowards. They ran away. And Socrates actually stuck up for them. And I think maybe as a soldier, he knew that sometimes you get scared, you flee. I don't know. But the key thing was he had a sense of integrity. He stuck up for these people who were very unpopular because he thought it was the right thing to do. And he spoke up for them. And I think he knew he would lose the vote, but he still nevertheless stood up for them because he thought it was the right thing to do. So whether or not you agree or not, whether what position should have been taken, the guy believed in doing the right thing, even if it made himself look foolish or made himself unpopular. He was also a philosopher, right? Someone who loves wisdom. That's literally what philosophy means. And I think while he did his work as a stonecutter, his mind would kind of wander and he would think and he would ask questions about the world around him. In other words, he wanted to pursue knowledge. And especially in Greek philosophy, there's this connection or this idea that the best sort of knowledge is knowledge of how to live, right? How do you live a good life? So Socrates wants to know, obtain knowledge and wisdom of what? Of how to live a good life. Now, what's interesting is that Socrates had a friend. And the friend, for some reason, decided that he wanted to ask the oracle who the wisest person in the world was. Right? The oracle keeps coming up. That's coming back. That's why I like to mention the oracle. So the friend went to the oracle and said, who's the wisest person in the world? And it's fascinating because the oracle did something the oracle doesn't usually do. It gave a straight answer. Usually the oracle, speaks in riddles. The other thing that was kind of surprising was the oracle told Socrates' friend that Socrates was the wisest person in the world. Now, his friend was shocked by this. I mean, imagine being told that one of your drinking buddies basically was the wisest person in the world. So Socrates' friend was shocked, but you can better believe that Socrates himself was even more shocked by this idea, right? I mean, imagine if someone says to you, you are the wisest person in the world. So Socrates was kind of surprised by this. But Socrates believed in the gods, was a pious person, and he said, well, the oracle must want to teach me something. Remember, one thing I want to remember, the oracle is a representative of Apollo, who's a god of wisdom, along with Athena, and of course Socrates is from Athens. So here's the thing. if someone claims to be the wisest person in the world and they find just one other person wiser than them, then they can't be the wisest person in the world, right? Because at least one person is wiser. So Socrates said, okay, I'm going to go out and try and question people and find someone wiser than myself. Maybe that's what the oracle wants me to do. So he went around questioning people. So, for example, he went to a judge and said, what's justice? A judge should know what justice is, right? Because a judge does nothing but, hear cases and adjudicate justice. He went to a soldier and asked what bravery was. He went to a priest and said, what is piety? Right? What is faith in the gods? And the thing was, Socrates would receive an answer from these people and would find problems with the answer. He would find that they would give answers that didn't make sense or that were illogical. So, for example, Socrates went to the priest and said, what is piety? And the priest said, well, following the will of the gods. And Socrates said, okay, but the problem with your definition is that sometimes the gods want different things, right? For example, Athena and Ares did not get along. So the problem is, how can you say that piety is doing the will of the gods when the gods themselves are in conflict? So Socrates is a really smart guy, and he uses logic to show that people maybe don't know what they're talking about, that people aren't half as smart as they think they are. And Socrates is kind of frustrated about this, but then suddenly he has a realization, an epiphany. He says, aha, I understand now. That judge thinks he understands justice. That priest thinks he understands piety, but they don't. I know that I don't understand justice. I know that I don't understand piety. And in realizing my ignorance, I have wisdom. By knowing what I don't know, or knowing rather that I don't know, I have wisdom. And because I admit that I don't know, I'm willing to learn. Someone who thinks they know what justice is stops thinking about justice. They stop trying to learn more about justice. But Socrates, by realizing his own ignorance, was now asking questions, trying to learn, trying to understand. And he suddenly realized that's what makes me the wisest person in the world. Not because I know a lot, but because I admit my ignorance. Admitting our ignorance is the first step towards real learning. I love Socrates. Wonderful man. Now, here's the thing, though. He was going around questioning powerful people. Remember, I said he questioned a priest. He questioned a judge. He questioned a general. And he kind of made them look bad. And what happened is young people, college age, were flocking around him. And they were learning to do the same thing. They were learning to use logic to critique and to challenge and to question authority. So this makes a lot of people not like Socrates. So what's going to happen is he's going to be put on trial. There's basically 2 counts against him. One is corrupting the youth, because he was teaching them how to ask questions, and another was atheism, that he didn't believe in the gods. Now, what's interesting about, he was put on trial, and he was found guilty. And what's fascinating about how the Athenian justice system worked is this. So, in our system of justice, usually the jury decides whether or not you're guilty, and then the judge passes sentence. But in Athens, I believe it was the judge, would suggest a sentence, and the person who was found guilty would also suggest a sentence, and they would vote to see which sentence would be followed, right? So Socrates was sentenced to death, but then someone proposed the sentence of death, but he had the option of giving another suggestion. So a lot of times what you would do is if you were sentenced to death, you would suggest exile, having to leave the city. And if your crime wasn't too big, instead of killing you, people would vote, and they would vote for exile. But Socrates, and I love this man so much, Socrates said, I think that I am doing a valuable service. So basically, I think my sentence should be, you should give me a nice place to live, and you should give me food every day. right? You should take care of me. You should provide for my needs so I can focus on asking you questions and exposing your ignorance. So you better believe people voted that he be put to death, right? But I love that chutzpah, right? I love that courage that rather than trying to save his life by saying exile, he said, you need someone to criticize you. You need someone to question you. And he compared himself to being like a fly on a horse who's always bothering the horse. But in the end, he's doing it for the good of his city. He's doing it out of love for his city. He wants to make Athens a better place by asking questions. And then his mode of execution is to drink poison. So Socrates, I think, is very important because he encourages us to doubt and to question to find truth. And it's interesting that Western philosophy, in a sense, begins with doubt, begins with questioning. One other thing before we move on I want to note is that Socrates argued very strongly that in order for democracy to work, you must have an educated voters. People should be educated because he was afraid that if people did not learn the accumulated wisdom of the past, they could be tricked. And my hope is that by studying ancient societies and up into the medieval period in this class, you'll get a better understanding of how human beings work, how we think, and you'll be able to critically engage, like Socrates, with contemporary leaders and politicians and authority figures and things like that. Now, one thing I also need to stress, because history is essentially the study of change over time, I want to notice a transformation in Greek ideals. Remember, for Odysseus and the early Greeks, with their military values, they focused on winning by any means necessary. Right? They focused on winning by any means necessary. Those are not the values of Socrates. Right? Socrates believed very differently. Socrates thought that truth and virtue were more important than life. For Odysseus, virtue was just being skilled and being able to figure out how to win. But for Socrates, the goal was virtue and truth, and that it was more important to do what was right than it was to live. And Socrates is famous for saying basically, in life there are two enemies that chase us, death and evil. And it's much better that death should catch us than evil should. Meaning it's better for us to die than to do evil. So like I said, I love Socrates, and I hope you do too. Great guy.